everyone for taking the time. I want to thank everyone for taking the time this afternoon to join us for our Digital Equity Planning Grant and Affordable Connectivity Program overview. So we will hear from some of the key subject matter experts in the state, kind of around some of the emerging opportunities associated with this work. And this is really kind of our first kind of opportunity to engage with the community as we begin to draw down on some of the federal resources associated with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and then also the resources available through the Affordable Connectivity Program. So my name is Jarrett Hughes. I'm a senior policy advisor in the governor's office, and I focus on our aging and older adult specific portfolio. And I will pass it to my colleague, Catherine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to kick off this process. I'm Catherine Keegan. I'm the director for the Office of the Future of Work at the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. I oversee our digital equity work as well as our state apprenticeship agency. I'll pass it to Ashley to introduce herself.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ashley Heathfield. I am a senior project manager with the Office of eHealth Innovation out of the Lieutenant Governor's Office. I lead our telehealth and digital equity strategies, and I've been working with Catherine on the Digital Equity Planning Grant. And then I will pass it along to Delia.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Good afternoon. My name is Delia Sanchez, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist at the Governor's Office of Information and Technology.
All right, and then I will kick us off with some definitions to just make sure we've got some shared language and understanding. So digital literacy is the first term. It is the ability to use technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. And then digital inclusion refers to activities that ensure all individuals and communities have access to information and communication technologies and the literacy and the skills to use them. It is an overarching approach, there we go. It is an overarching approach to ensure that all members of a community are digitally ready, meaning they are able to access, use, and understand digital technologies and content without barriers. And this ultimately leads to digital equity, which, next slide, is when all individuals and communities have the information technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. It's necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services like healthcare. And digital equity can't happen without the right infrastructure. Communities need access to affordable high-speed internet, affordable web-enabled devices, and training and support to understand how to use the technology. Next slide. So a Colorado survey done in 2021 aimed to look at digital literacy, telehealth perceptions, and telehealth usage. The epidemiologist analyzing the results applied digital literacy scores based on responses to questions that assessed one's digital literacy and found that respondents 65 and older had statistically lower levels of digital literacy than all other age groups. Rural respondents had lower levels of digital literacy than urban. Respondents identifying as Black or African American had lower digital literacy scores, and Hispanic and Latinx respondents had higher digital literacy scores. And then respondents making $50,000 or less a year had lower digital literacy scores than those making more than $50,000. Next slide. So the same survey showed that of respondents who had not seen a healthcare provider in the last 2 years, nearly 60% had below average digital literacy scores. Those with lower digital literacy scores were also less likely to have used telehealth, 64% compared to 76% of respondents with high digital literacy scores. And these respondents were also more likely to feel that the quality of telehealth visits was less than in person, and were more likely to feel that the telehealth process was difficult to use. Next slide. So the information on the previous slide is significant because the perception that telehealth is difficult to use seemed to also impact a respondent's willingness to try telehealth. And those who didn't use telehealth, and even those who hadn't seen a provider during the time frame, were less confident that they would receive the same quality of care, even though they had never used it before. These are important considerations given the hopes that telehealth would be a tool to increase access to healthcare and decrease burden on patients to travel and make accommodations for in-person care. Digital literacy and access to the internet are also considered a super social determinant of health. They're the backbone of all other social determinants of health, such as economic sustainability, healthcare, education, and more. An analysis from Microsoft suggests that the number of Americans without adequate broadband could be over 163 million. Digital inclusion must be the framework for which we all approach virtual engagement. Otherwise, the potential for widening existing disparities is great. An intervention generated inequality is when, despite well-meaning intentions, an intervention works, but works better for those who are already better off. And when this happens, our work actually increases inequality. And in the health space, we are already seeing this play out in access to digital tools such as patient portals or even the use of telehealth. Next slide. A recent JAMA study estimated that 13 million older adults, or 30% of the older adult population in the US, are currently unready for telemedicine, with higher percentages for those who are low income, with less education, rural, and in poorer health. And this was predominantly owing to inexperience with technology. And then in 2021, the Office of eHealth Innovation funded Prime Health to do the Colorado Telehealth Providers Survey. And among the top 5 barriers that providers reported for connecting with their patients via telehealth included lack of digital literacy, lack of understanding of telehealth services, and a lack of access to technology or broadband. And I'll pass it over to Catherine.
And building, yeah, thanks, Ashley. And so building off that, we know that given that digital literacy and access is a super social determinant of health, it affects so many different parts of our lives, and the barriers to that access have real implications for our health, our personal lives, our work, and our education. And so we know that this is really important as technology continues to evolve and work and education continue to change. LinkedIn found that the half-life of tech skills is about 5 years. And so it's imperative that as a state, as communities, we have the infrastructure for digital skill development. And these interventions and this work is so important because we know that there's about a third of American workers who have limited or no digital skills. So we wanted to ground you all in this data and why this matters. I know many of you have been working in this space for a long time, and others may be newer to this issue, but the too long don't read for all of this is that this impacts all of us in our personal lives, in our work, and in the opportunities we're trying to create for Coloradans. And so we're so excited about the investment from the IIJA, the Federal Infrastructure Package, and the Digital Equity Act. So going to the next slide, we wanted to provide an overview of where we are in this process. Again, I know that some of you have been involved in these conversations and others are coming to this for the first time. So wanted to give an overview of where we are. So everyone's coming with that same understanding. So with the federal bill, the IIJA passing last year, we have the Digital Equity Act as part of that. And so one of the most exciting parts from our perspective is that there's actually state funding to build a state plan related to the digital divide. And so while there is parallel investment in broadband infrastructure, there's for the first time real investment in the adoption gap and making sure that people have the devices, digital skills, and access to affordable internet that they need in order to thrive. So where we are right now is that we have submitted our application as a state for the formula dollars that are to support a state planning process. So over the next year, we are going to go through a process of understanding the digital divide at a very concrete level. And then we will be setting measurable objectives to close the divide that we will then have funding to implement. So by the end of September, we are expecting funds to be distributed from the federal government to Colorado. That will then kick off our actual planning process. Then we have the 1-year marker once those funds are distributed to build our plan. After those plans are complete within that 1 year, there'll be an additional formula funding allocation to each state to actually implement those plans. At the same time, there will be other competitive grants available to organizations within states to apply. So if you have an intervention or if there are particular programs that will close the digital divide for populations that will go over, you would be able as an anchor institution or other organization to apply for those funds directly in addition to the implementation dollars that will flow through the state agencies. At that point, we'll have about 5 years as funded to implement our state plans, with the hope and expectation that there would be continued funding to do this work. So that's sort of the very high level timeline that we're working on. So we're at the very beginning stages and in a bit of a holding pattern as we wait for those funds to be distributed to work this, to begin the state planning process. At the same time, as I mentioned, there are dollars for actual broadband infrastructure. And so if we go to the next slide, we wanted to make sure that it's clear for everyone here, about the roles and responsibilities, as there's so much related to digital equity that is underway, happening at the same time. So you heard from each of us introducing ourselves that we have an interagency approach to this work, which has made Colorado quite unique, and I think is a real strength for how we're approaching the digital divide. So the way we've submitted our application for this digital equity state planning grant really mirrors that. So the way the funds will work is that we have OIT and the Colorado Broadband Office that will serve as the administering entity, handle fiscal processes for these dollars, as well as supporting the GIS mapping needs that are required as part of our state planning process. So OIT will handle those, and then we will have the Office of eHealth Innovation and the Office of Future of Work serving as project leads to actually build out the state plan in partnership with all of you and others that will engage in this process. So a bit of a unique model, but again, I think it just speaks to the collaborative nature of Colorado and our state agencies, and puts us at a really in a really strong position to have a comprehensive state plan that addresses the intersectional nature of the digital divide. I saw one question come in about the half-life of tech skills comment. So that's just referring to the fact that technology is changing so rapidly that about every 5 years you'll need to upskill in some way to be able to use different technologies. So if we were in person, I'd ask everyone to raise their hand if they had to learn a new piece of technology in the last 6 months or in the last year. And so we just wanted to iterate that because we know that this is going to be an ongoing issue, and that's why we need to understand the current divide and build and invest in solutions that will help us have a sustainable path for skill development. So when I need to learn new digital skills, I have a place to go, as well as every other Coloradan. All right, so now that you have the general timeline of this next year, as well as sort of the administrative structure that we're working under, wanted to go into a little bit more detail about what the Digital Equity Planning Grant is and what we're expecting to come to Colorado and what we will be working to understand over the next year in partnership with all of you. So based on the original notice of funding opportunity and the formula that the feds created, we're expecting about $897,000 to come to Colorado. This is an estimate, so depending on how much, whether all of the states applied, whether all the territories applied for these funds that are approved, then the funding might change slightly, but we're anticipating around $900,000 just for the planning process. So everything that these funds go to has to be to inform our state plan, to understand the things that are underway already, the interventions that we might want to test. And then the implementation a year from now will be where we actually get to fund programs and community work. So this money is all to understand and define the problem and build our plan to close that divide. The other thing that's really great about the Digital Equity Act and the planning grant is that it's really focused on the populations that are often disconnected themselves. So everything in our plan is connected to covered populations, is required to be connected to these covered populations that were named in the application. You can see it's a pretty comprehensive list with, I think if we had a Venn diagram of all of these covered populations, we'd see a lot of overlap. But I think it's really powerful and, again, an exciting approach for a federal grant to put people at the center and to require us to do that ourselves as we understand the real adoption gap in the divide. So our covered populations include low-income households, racial or ethnic minority groups, rural Coloradans, individuals with a language barrier. This includes both immigrants who are learning English, but also includes Colorado or American-born individuals who have low literacy levels. So there is sort of the adult education as well as the English language learner call out there. We also have older adults, individuals with disabilities, veterans, and incarcerated individuals. So many of you who received this invite or who have been engaged in this work before represent state agencies or organizations that are serving these covered populations. And that's what we really want to double down on in our planning process. So going to the next slide, what does the plan have to include? So if we have a year to build out the best digital equity state plan in the nation, we want to make sure that we're covering all our bases and that we're really understanding the nuances of the divide for the covered population. So, at a high level, the plan will include our vision for digital equity in Colorado. And I say our, meaning everyone on this call, that will be working to support this build out so that we have a vision that really represents the true nature of the issue. And then the bulk of the work will be in understanding and building the objectives for the covered populations. So in the state plan and the Digital Equity Act, they name a few key components of digital inclusion that we'll be focusing on. So you can see them listed here. And just to go into a little bit more detail, we have to understand the availability of and affordability and access to fixed and wireless broadband technology. We have to understand the online accessibility and inclusivity of public resources and services. So that one in particular will be focused on accessibility of our state systems and public benefits systems as we work to reimagine state governments and bring more services online, understanding how we're making sure everyone has access to those. If you are digitally disconnected and don't have internet in your home or comfort with the technology, how do we make sure that those resources are still available to you? We need to understand the digital literacy levels, as well as awareness and use of security measures and online privacy measures for individuals. And then we want to make sure, and we have to make sure that we understand the availability and affordability of consumer devices and technical support for those devices. So these are the sort of subject areas that we need to understand and build measurable objectives for each covered population. So all of the information that we gather will be broken out by those covered populations, and we'll have to cover each of these aspects. So again, a very comprehensive list, which is really exciting because it's such a cross-cutting issue. Related to that, we also will need to make sure we have an assessment of how the measurable objectives will impact and interact with the other state agencies' existing plans. So we have plans around economic and workforce development, educational outcomes, health outcomes, civic and social engagement, as well as the delivery of essential services. And so in our state plan, we'll have to connect the digital divide to each of those other state services and agencies, as well as understand at the local level how the digital divide and these objectives play into those. So with that, we will need to do a needs assessment, an asset inventory to understand the current resources and work being done at the local level. And again, have that targeted by those covered populations. We want to understand the funding mechanisms. We know that there were a lot of interventions put in place and in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we want to understand which of those are working and how we sustain those that are and build on those promising practices where they exist. And we also need to connect our state plan to the local state plan or local digital equity plans and any plans from tribal communities as well. So again, it's comprehensive. It covers pretty much every aspect of the digital divide and is focused on understanding it from that population perspective. So we'll be looking both externally and internally at our own systems to see what the current landscape is and then figure out how we might close that divide. I might pause for questions there before I jump into our proposal, if there's anything, Jarrett or Ashley, coming in. Okay, I think we're good to go. Okay, cool. So going to the next slide, we wanted to provide an overview of what we submitted to the federal agency administering these dollars. Though there was, the requirements laid out that we just went over, each state is approaching this process a little bit differently because this is the first time there's been an investment of this nature. And so our approach in our application was to really focus on driving funds to community-based organizations and partners that are working with these covered populations to inform our efforts. So our goal is to use the bulk of the planning dollars to fund organizations to conduct community outreach, inform the plan development, participate in our digital equity committee, collect data on the digital divide and user experience. And so as part of that, we want to make sure that we're providing funds that can go directly to the lived experts from the covered populations, to make sure that we're conducting listening sessions to inform the state plan, and so that we're taking a both, sort of top-down and bottom-up approach to really have a comprehensive look at this issue. Additionally, we'll be using the funds to pay for part of the state positions that will be supporting this effort. So because we plan to issue many subawards, we want to make sure that we have the procurement and finance staff at OIT to be able to do that effectively. So some of the state funds will go to that process, as well as funding some of the staff positions that are coordinating these efforts. But the bulk will be going to those subawards, as well as the contracts with statewide data collection processes, so that we're embedding digital literacy and inclusion questions into existing data collection mechanisms and gathering information that way as well. So a big part of the digital equity state planning process will be done in partnership with the broadband office and their community engagement efforts related to BEAD, broadband equity access and deployment, which is funding that is primarily targeted towards infrastructure build out. So laying fiber, building the infrastructure to actually close any sort of access gaps there are in terms of broadband access. And so we'll be working with them as they do their listening sessions to make sure that we're asking questions about adoption and informing our state plan in that way as well. So that is our community engagement plan. I might have jumped the gun a little bit on the next slide to talk about data collection. So if you want to go to that, our goal again is to embed digital literacy and access in existing mechanisms. So that's where our digital equity committee that I'll talk about will help us understand where there's already ready data being collected and where we can embed those questions, where we might need to pay for a new survey and other sort of more large-scale data collection efforts. But then we also want to make sure that we're funding sort of the qualitative approach to data gathering, so we understand the actual user experience and what the experience of the covered populations are as it relates to the aspects we discussed earlier. So digital literacy skills, comfort and trust in using the internet and digital devices, what types of devices do people have access to, and what are the barriers there. And so with that, wanted to make sure we talked about next steps. I know this is a high level overview and I think there might have been some questions coming in, so we can talk a little bit about that before we transition to discussing the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is an immediate resource that can be used to close the digital divide. But our overall process right now is to, well, we're in sort of that holding pattern to wait for the federal funds to be distributed to each state, and that will set us off running. So we are excited to be sort of getting this head start right now in order to organize ourselves and establish the infrastructure we need to do this effectively. So many of you were involved in our subcommittee on digital literacy and inclusion. That was part of the formally established Broadband Advisory Board. We are repurposing that committee to be focused specifically on the digital equity state plan. So we will be launching the Digital Equity Committee that will be engaging community-based organizations and other partners who are connected to those covered populations that we listed to participate in our planning process. That won't be the only way to engage in this process. We will, as I said, be doing listening sessions around the state. If you would like to host listening sessions or you have ideas about what that could look like and how to engage your community, we would love to talk further about that. And we will be building out that community engagement plan as part of this process. We are also going to be establishing a state agency working group because a huge part of the plan is focused on accessibility of our state systems, and there's a lot of work being done at the state level to understand the accessibility of our state systems and implementation of legislation to improve the accessibility of our state systems, as well as the cross-cutting nature of a lot of these existing plans. We want to make sure that we have a state agency group that can focus on that alignment across our various departments, and we'll be bringing those updates to the Digital Equity Committee as well as using the Digital Equity Committee to inform what the state agencies should be addressing, so that there's sort of a feedback loop between the information we're gathering from those lived experts, from the community-based organizations that are funded to do focus groups and listening sessions, to understand where we need to make the biggest changes in the state systems. Because this is new to every state, we are excited that the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is putting on a workshop with states in partnership with the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So we'll be joining the states in our local region to really learn how everyone is tackling this and learn from other states about how they're structuring their state planning process, so that we can take what works and bring that to Colorado, and also inform other states about how we're trying to drive a very community-based approach. So that will be taking place at the end of September in order to, which is great timing as we wait for those federal funds to come down. Additionally, through legislation this last session, we'll be launching a digital navigator program in the next year. In the next calendar year is when we'll be launching that, and those will be other sources of both resources for community-based organizations, as those will be granted. Those digital navigators will be funded at the community level, and those will be part of our data gathering process as well for our state plan. So I think I covered everything, but I definitely, Jarrett or Ashley, if I missed anything, please feel free to fill in the gaps, and then yeah, happy to take a few questions.
Oh, that was great, Catherine. I'm gonna just read a couple questions that came through the chat. Tracy, I did respond to yours. Yes, local governments are eligible for subgrants. For example, interestingly, even like housing authorities are listed as eligible entities as well. So kind of a unique piece there. And then, oh gosh, and now I just messed it all up. Where'd it go? Judy had a good question around, acknowledging that Colorado has invested state and local funds to address digital equity already. How will we think the federal government requirements around Digital Equity Act funds not supplanting but supplementing those resources play out?
Yeah, it's a great point, something that we're very conscious of, and I think is part of where participation from the Digital Equity Committee members to understand where those funds have already been distributed, how those are working, where we want to double down on those investments and supplement those, or where there's gaps that haven't been funded that we can use these new funds to address, I think is part of the strategy. And then the state agency partners. I know I was on a session yesterday with a group talking about our process, and they brought up adult education funding that is often used to provide digital literacy, even though it's not funded directly. So how do we make sure that we're aligning with those efforts and using it in a very complementary way, because this is such unique and new funding that we haven't had before. So our goal is to have a very engaged committee and state agency partnership, so that we're making sure we're understanding how that funding has worked so far, and where we might need to shift things or best plug in the new funds.
And then Jose from Colorado Cross-Ability Coalition, I believe that's the logo I'm seeing there, had a question around kind of how the grants would be distributed. And I think perhaps, Jose, I might ask you to maybe come off mute and elaborate a bit more. If I had to guess, I think we're probably thinking about the BEAD program grants here around broadband deployment. Catherine, are you seeing this question in the chat? Since internet service providers are in the hands of large corporations, assuming the grants will be given to those specific entities with stipulations for development and geographic expectations.
Yeah, I think that connects more to the BEAD dollars and even the capital project funds that are currently part of the Broadband Office's work plan. The digital equity state planning dollars, one, would be focused on that data gathering piece, and then two are focused more on the adoption side. So once there is broadband, or if there's broadband available to you at a community anchor institution, how do we make sure that people are adopting and doing that effectively? But happy to follow up and connect you with those that are running that process in the Broadband Office, because they will be able to speak to it better than I will.
And then Elena, first let me say, very happy to see that you're working on some age-friendly community and livable community efforts. Love to see that. And I would say, yes, I think, if you are kind of, I think the eligibility component here would be making sure you're coordinating with a nonprofit entity or kind of your local government to go after some of these sub-awards and grants. But I think I would love to bring in our age-friendly community network and make sure that they're represented through this work. So I'm happy to see you're doing that. And I want to be developed. Esther Clark had a kind of a sustainability plan question here most recently.
Yeah, that's I'm seeing that question there, and that's, I think, what is really exciting about the Digital Equity Act and the funds is that it's not just a planning grant, but that there is in the legislation, and that's been approved, the plan to fund implementation of the plan for 5 years. So our goal is to make the most of that and spend all of that money so we show how much of an issue this is and make it go as far as possible so that this continues to be funded at the federal level, and then that we also support it at the state level. I think right now most of the funding has been in pockets or as part of other things at the state level. And so huge opportunities to really make the case through our state plan and through the implementation of the state plan as well.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And so I think, being conscious of time, want to move to Delia and the Affordable Connectivity Program. But if questions continue to pop up related to digital equity, please feel free to put those in the chat and we will revisit those given our timing. So I will pass it over to you, Delia.
Thanks, Jared, and good afternoon again. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you regarding the Affordable Connectivity Program, also known as ACP. As I mentioned before at the beginning of this presentation, my name is Delia Sanchez, and I am the community engagement specialist at the Governor's Office of Information and Technology. And I was looking at the participants, and I see Salvador and I see Dayton, and I know that I have met with Salvador, and I'm going to meet with Dayton to keep talking about ACP and how all of you can help me spread the word to all of the residents here in Colorado. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what is ACP? The Affordable Connectivity Program was created by the FCC to help households struggling to pay for internet services. And as part of that effort, the FCC is mobilizing people and organizations to help raise awareness about the ACP program. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, to talk to you about the ACP, so then you can go to your communities and let them know about this great program and what it's providing. Like, for example, up to $30 a month discount for broadband services, both mobile phone and home internet. And for our qualifying tribal lands, up to $75 a month discount. And what I think is pretty cool, one of the things that ACP is providing, especially for family members that have kids in college or in a school, it's a discount of up to $100 towards a laptop, a desktop computer, or a tablet. The only thing that we are asking participants is to contribute up to $10 or more than $10, but less than $50 towards the purchase of this electronic device. Next slide, please. So who is eligible for ACP? Households are eligible to enroll if their income is below 200% of the federal poverty line, or if someone in their household at this moment is receiving government benefits like SNAP, Medicaid, SSI, they have a Pell Grant student or a student that is receiving free and reduced lunch, also known as FRL, housing aid. So if you or know anyone that is part or is receiving government benefits, please let them know about the ACP. Sadly, almost 80% of qualifying families in Colorado at this moment aren't taking advantage of this program. Our sign-up rate is only of 21%. And we want to increase those numbers. We want our community to be aware of ACP so they can benefit from this program that will last at least a couple of years. So please, please spread the word. Next slide, please. So how can people apply, community members can apply for the ACP? There are 3 ways that they can apply. And for me, the more friendly one is applying online. Of course, participants will have to create an account, complete an application, which at this moment is available in English and in Spanish. And once they apply and fill out the application, they will let them know right away if they are approved for this program. Another way of applying is by mail, which I think it's a little bit more complicated since you will have to print the application instructions, also the household worksheet to see if your household qualifies for the ACP. You can find them also in English and in Spanish. But once you complete these forms and you make copies of any extra documentation, you will have to mail it at the PO box that you can see in this moment on your screen. And lastly, people can apply through a participating internet service company. They can ask internet service provider if they're participating in the ACP, or use our online tool to find out any participating company near you. And what I'm going to do at this moment is I'm going to put in the chat a link where participants can go and see if any service provider near them participate in the AC program. Next slide, please. So what happens after you apply? Once you submit an application, you will either receive an approval code or you will be asked to submit additional information. But once an applicant has been approved, they will receive an approved code. They can share that code with the provider that they are using at this moment and start receiving their monthly discount right away. If they don't have a participating provider, if they don't have a provider at this moment, once again, they can use the information that I just put in the link and find out who companies near them are part of the ACP program. I'm glad when I was doing my research about the ACP, I was glad to find out that the ACP has a support center that was established to answer any questions that consumers and those supporting consumers might have. The call center support, it's available in English and in Spanish and 200 other languages upon request. Another way to contact the support center is by email at the acpsupport@usac.org. I'm going to put that information also in the chat for you guys to have it available. And also you can contact them by phone at 877-384-2575. They're available Monday through Sunday, so they're 7 days a week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern time. And I'm also dropping the phone number in the chat for you guys. And then we can go to the next slide. Are we going to the next slide, please? Oh, thank you. If you would like to get more information, resources, if you would like to find out flyers and marketing material, you can go to the Consumers Outreach Toolkit and get more information that you can use to promote this by email, by your social media, by your monthly newsletter. But also you can email me at delia.sanchez@state.co.us. I will be happy to share with you any marketing material, also be part of any of your monthly meetings, but also host a meeting for your community, either in English or in Spanish. Feel free to contact me at any moment. And if you have any questions, please just put it in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Delia. And oh, whoops. Let's get back to, let's see. Is that still sharing for folks? We had my screen just did something kind of crazy.
Yeah, we can still see the slides.
Okay, great. So I'm going back just a little bit to, I believe, the question that Jose first put in the chat around eligibility. So Jose, you asked about employees of small nonprofits, and I believe this came through on this slide. So Delia, obviously, please feel free to jump in. But I think, yes, I mean, as long as those employees' household income matches up with the eligibility requirements for this program, they would be eligible. Is that accurate, Jose? Is that getting at your question?
Perfect. And Jose, feel free to email me if you would like to get more information about who is eligible. We can always do together the household worksheet if you would like to, but happy to support you in any way.
And Renice had a question in here. Have there been conversations with the target population for ACP to understand why people are not signing up? I've heard about specific barriers, but not enough to understand how widespread the challenges are. Is that something you could speak to, Delia?
Yes, I have been reaching out to different communities. I think like at the beginning, we weren't promoting ACP that much. Right now, I started the CBO at the end of June. And as soon as I was aware of this program, I have been reaching out to different communities. It has been a little bit hard at the beginning, especially when we were targeting schools in the whole state of Colorado, since the schools were off during the summer, also with colleges. But at this time, I'm honestly reach out to all 14 regions and trying to promote this program as much as I can. Once again, if you would like me to meet with people of your community, feel free to send me an email. I just put my email in the chat, and I will be happy to host a meeting or be part of your monthly meeting.
And Holly just asked, what if the person who is eligible is not the name listed on the internet account?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so Holly just posted, what if the person who is eligible is not the name listed on the internet account?
If that person is part of the household, that won't be a problem. They will still be able to get the discount because it's by zip code, it's by the home address. So I don't think that that will be an issue. I just saw Holly with your roommate situations. College students, just to give you an example, let's say that there are 4 college students living in the same household, but they don't share the bills. Everybody pays their own stuff. That means that in that household, there are 4 people that will qualify for this program. Unless, let's say there's a family, there's 2 families living in the same house and they are sharing the bills, that means that there's only 1 family that will qualify for that discount. That's a good question about the migrant programs. I honestly don't have an answer for that, but I will take notes of that and I will get back to you, okay? If you could please put your email address, I would love to answer that question. But if they're using, what I'm thinking right now, if they're using that discount on for their phone, even if they're moving from one side to another, their discount, they're still going to get the discount because it's for either for their cell phones or it's either for their laptops at home or a device that they have in their household. But if they use that discounts towards their phone internet, it doesn't matter where they go. I hope that answers your question.
Maybe I will stop the full screen share there. In case, if there are any questions that folks have that correspond to any specific slides or anything in that presentation, happy to pull that back up and go to it to help talk through. But I think we have about 9 minutes left in our allotted time. So if there are any more questions, certainly encourage folks to come off mute and ask, or put those in the chat, or if you don't have any questions and you'd like to spend the next, Catherine, can we give folks an opportunity to unmute?
Always fun on a digital equity webinar to not do something correctly. So I thought I gave everyone access, but let me.
And for what it's worth, everyone,
maybe people can try now.
And for what it's worth, we were joking about this the other day about how there was bound to be some sort of technical digital mistake along the way. Still not working.
All right. I'm going to do this. I'm going to trust everyone to not abuse it because there's an opportunity to ask all to unmute, and we'll see what happens if there are people. So now you should be able to.
Seems
yes.
like a trustworthy group of folks.
Huzzah.
I thought we just had
awesome.
a quiet group.
If anyone has any questions or comments or ideas, to make that experience worth our while. So yeah, Trent, go ahead.
Yeah, I raised my hand, so maybe that's a way, given how many folks are here. Trent Thompson, I'm with Economic Development Administration out of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So thank you, first of all, for hosting this and putting this on and giving this run through. I just want to make sure you know I'm a resource. I've worked with CBO in the past, but I also work with all the economic development districts and tribal nations in a lot of broadband related projects. And so we want to make sure we can be a resource to you when you're doing these assessments, when you're working through. So just know, although I'm going to be out in the next week for 3 weeks on a vacation we've been postponing for a while, but in the meantime, if you need to get a hold of EDA, please do so, because I would be happy to help navigate what programs we've supported in Colorado related to broadband.
Awesome. Thanks, Trent.
Looks like Sarah is next.
Yeah, hey everyone. Sorry, I am not going to take myself on the camera because I'm actually driving in the car, but I just wanted to introduce myself as well. My name is Sarah Smith. I used to be with the Colorado Broadband Office, but now I'm the Federal Program Officer with the NTIA, who is responsible for supporting the state in the Digital Equity Act as well as BEAD. So if you need my help with anything, please reach out and I'll be folded into this process as well as this team gets going. So really appreciated the presentation. Thank you for including me, and I'm available as a resource. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. Jose.
Yes, hi, Ashley. Thank you. So I, like somebody said, one of you said, I work for the Colorado Coast Disability Coalition. I actually was asked by Josh Winkler from the governor's office to be in this and participate. And I wanted to bring something up. It's related to the first question I asked in the chat. Nowadays, starting in more or less February or March of this year, and I think we need to consider this all together, is that a household of one of earning over 200% of the federal poverty level is no longer sufficient. Because, for example, I earn around, I will say 350% over the poverty level, or a little more maybe, and I'm still struggling with paying off my bills, even though CCDC is helping me pay, for example, for my internet, because I do use site-to-site, site-to-site connections, and because I'm the IT manager, I transfer, an average of 1.5 to 1.7 terabytes back and forth from my office to my home office, and I still don't qualify, obviously. And when I tried before asking CCDC to pay for it, and if that was a possibility, the reality is that I found out among my coworkers that we are on the same boat, especially people who live in the Boulder area, people who live outside the Boulder area, but outside of the Denver area, people who live in the mountains, in the Ute Mountain region, who are working for CCDC. They don't have at all a decent internet connection, and when they do, they have to pay an arm and a leg for it to Comcast because there are no other alternatives. So I would like to see something in this group to not force, because I'm not saying force, work with gigantic providers like Comcast, because let's face it, Comcast, which is AT&T, which is Xfinity, which is Warner Brothers, etc., is the major provider, and it has the best connections in the state and in many other states. So if we were to work with them, for example, to build a better network on areas like Grand Junctions, Indian reservations, for example, that will start addressing these type of issues.
Thanks, Jose. I mean, I think what you kind of call out here is, I think, some of the broader kind of arbitrary nature of setting some of these items in policy. And I think, unfortunately, I think obviously we are responding to the guidelines that have been passed down in the bill from the federal government. But Tracy actually put in the chat that something they have met with Comcast around the Affordable Connectivity Program, and that they are open to hearing feedback. And I think this is the type of feedback that is necessary, because we know with cost of living, especially in the metro area, 200% of federal poverty level doesn't make sense everywhere. So I appreciate that feedback. And Tracy, I might ask you, do you have, realizing we have a minute left here, do you have 30 seconds top line on that conversation?
We met with Mary, who I think just put something in the chat too, and someone else at Comcast whose names I can't remember, who might also be here, and just kind of explain some of the issues we've been seeing as we're signing people up for ACP, specifically with Comcast. And they've told us they're working on some of that. Like you said, they can't change the federal guidelines, but there are some kind of procedural things that they might be able to help address. But I'll let the Comcast people talk about Comcast.
Yeah, hey, it's Mary Spillane from Comcast. I'll post a few things in the chat and I'll include my contact information. I'm happy to help any of you individually. If your agency has questions or you're working with an individual household or customer that has questions, it's not my intention to promote us heavily, but I'm just going to post some resources in the chat in case they're helpful.
No, Mary, to be honest with you, 200% over the poverty level is only 24,000. And for one individual, and that's nothing. So, and for example, in my work and in the work of most of my colleagues with CCDC, who are mostly working remotely since the pandemic, and because it is more comfortable after we implemented that, the truth is that we are earning more than that, first of all, but we do not need 60 megabytes. We need 600 or 300, so it's not something that helps us even at that level.
And so I want to acknowledge that we're a minute over, and I want to be respectful of people's time. I see that Mark has a hand raised. I think I could stay on for a moment after, I think, but obviously for folks who have to drop, who might have a 1 o'clock or have to move on to something else, we want to thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us. Again, this is kind of our first kind of broad community outreach push here, which is the first of many to come. I know we're excited about the work, and obviously, I think to Jose's point, there's plenty to be done here to fill gaps and get over some barriers that we know exist. So with that, Mark, I will call on you, and maybe we'll make this the last one.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jarrett. So my name is Mark Caldwell, and I'm with the Colorado Broadband Office. I want to thank everyone who's helping us promote ACP. We've just got about 760,000 households. About 1/3 of all households in Colorado are eligible. We've only got about 160,000 signed up. So we appreciate your help promoting that. I want to thank Jose for raising the topic of the income thresholds for families. It's a really important one. And I think the one comment I'd make is that at the CBO, we're focused on the access side of things, on the build out and the infrastructure. And I think the good news is everyone who's going to be receiving federal funding is required to offer an ACP eligible plan. And the government is redefining broadband. It's no longer 25/3, it's 100/20. So it's a real broadband product that you can have multiple people streaming videos and doing different things on, which is great. And in a lot of places, as we deploy fiber, we're going to get much higher than that, up to 1 gigabit per second at a lot of homes. But I think that's really important because these programs are going to build out, but we also need to be aware that even when we've built out in the past, the adoption rate always lags. So in Colorado, we've got, mid-90s in terms of, basic broadband build out, but we've got mid-70s in terms of adoption. There's always about a 20-25% gap, and cost is always cited as one of the top issues or factors why. So I wanted to just make sure everyone's aware that as we look to build out in new communities, there is an ACP component to it, which is really helpful. And maybe it doesn't work for everyone, but it's going to help close that gap for those who, cost is one of their big issues.
Thanks, Mark. And maybe with that, we will close it out. Catherine, Ashley, Delia, any closing comments, words of wisdom, jokes to leave us with this afternoon?
Just really thank everyone's participation in this session and patience as we've been working on this process. I know many of you have been engaged in doing this work for a long time, and so we're excited to learn from you and continue this process. So thank you, and much more to come.
Can't say it any better than that myself. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.